Well, humanity is going to be much more controlled this point forward because the ability for us to grow food has just been lost. And the realization of one, we cannot grow enough food in the Southern Hemisphere. Once that realized, for the traders at least, prices are going to go ape. There will be no more price discovery. As I was talking to somebody in the markets, they're going to go cash. Whoever has the most cash will buy it because price discovery will mean nothing. It will be who has supply and who will pay the most for it. And this is where we're moving to rapidly, like at the end of December, the realization of they didn't get it in the ground in the Southern Hemisphere and all the losses we're experiencing here in the Northern Hemisphere. At that point, they're going to have to start rationing food across the planet.
Ladies and gentlemen, Rex Bear, LeakProject, how the heck are you? Fantastic day today out here in Southern Colorado. It's getting chilly, but that's all right. We've got the fireplace. If things do get where they shut the power down, we've got plenty of firewood outside. I've got, all the essentials. And so does this guy right here, David DuByne. It's great to see you, man. It's been way too long. So David was sending me some vital information that we're going to share with you. And if you haven't subscribed to David's channel yet, make sure to do so. Adapt 2030. What's going on, man?
Well, I think we're all seeing it around the planet. In motion is the liquidation of our planet and the present way of life. Now, why is that happening right now was more the question. This could have happened, Rex, when you and it could have happened in, say, 2005, could have happened in 2015. But why is it happening right now should be more the question. The grand solar minimum on its 400-year cycle restricting food production globally is one thing, but electromagnetically, you knew there was going to be more volcanic eruptions, and boom, Tonga hits, and what happens? We see 2 or 3 days of news about the largest volcanic eruption since Tambora in 1815. International Space Station looping around the same zone directly over Tonga every 1.5 hours. And we have a mere 8 or 10 images of the entire eruption. What were they hiding? And more, what has happened since the eruption that they're still trying to hide? The best temperature data comes out until July, and that's what I have pretty much been on. Like they say in the South here, a duck on a June bug.
Let's try not to
Not
laugh.
that I'm a fan of eating bugs,
we
but
had to throw that out there. So the volcano itself is very interesting because of how high it did shoot into the atmosphere. And I heard down the grapevine that there was more than natural causes, but that's for a whole other podcast. But the weather has changed. It has seemed to cool off, and the data is suggesting that. But there's a lot of weird stuff going on, right? Like I just got back from Atomo, Iowa. The Des Moines River runs through there. It was the shallowest, the driest I've ever seen it. The Mississippi River's dry. The Lake Mead's drying up. I mean, there's all sorts of places drying up. Overseas in the Middle East, the Euphrates River is drying up right now. And then we've got extreme freezing in Antarctica. Were you saying something like that? Can you tell us more about that? What's going on with the crazy weather, man?
Well, I'm going to say we're experiencing the onset of a year without a summer, much like they did in 1816. So I had a chance to speak at agriculture and corn growers that are involved in the dairy industry in Nashville last month, mainly California dairy, the top makers of cheese, top dairy producers in America. I spoke there the year prior, and I was talking about electromagnetic fields and outbound current flows and how more highly charged outbound current flows coming off the hill currents and say mid-latitudes versus what we know that comes down on field-aligned currents or magnetic ropes coming in, bringing us the aurora. There's also outbound current. And since it's a little more electrified, what it does, it changes the charge in the atmosphere and affects local weather patterns. And I was mapping those out and say, well, there'll be a crop disturbance here. Look for oats to go to pretty high price because the Volga region in Russia, that current's currently, hitting it because you can look at the elves at the 100-mile above the Earth ionosphere mark and then trace those down to which crop regions are over. And that was my whole thing last year. And then a lot of things came true. And I was like, this whole coupling of this second magnetic field, the forecast giants are going to be lining up in October of 2024. And it's going to create a slight second magnetic field. And nobody really knows what this will happen or what disturbance this will have on our weather patterns as the sun steps down and its output and a second magnetic field fires up and the Earth is sandwiched between it in October. I think it's 23rd of 2024. Now, last year when we came through this intensifying magnetic coupling, Tonga went off. But that was in January. That was January 15th. And we are coming back into that same magnetic field, but it's going to be much more intense this year because those four gas giants have swung from where like this, they're going to square off, but they've come a little bit closer to squaring. And look at that. And then suddenly we have all these volcanoes across the planet that are going off, including in Hawaii. The drying that you're referring to is also in the Danube River. We got the Danube that's dried up to the point there's shipping stopped. If you look at the Amazon, also in a drought situation, so many of the rivers down around Argentina and Brazil are so dry they can't, move much barge traffic down there. But if you look at the height of the eruption, the water vapor, quote unquote, and this is for me, I'm reading all these peer-reviewed research papers on water vapor aerosols, and this time the eruption had three different things in it. And I know I'm rambling. I'm going to try to shorten my answer. They say the water vapor went up 187,000 feet into the atmosphere. But for me, I'm looking at the cloud nuclei and the condensation and thinking, all right, how does something go up that high and it still remains water vapor? Well, whatever it remains, it's a albedo sun blocking particulate in the atmosphere. Now, that has since looped well over the equator. That was 20 degrees south latitude, the Tonga eruption. But now the latest data I have, and remember, this data latest I have is only in July because they won't release the newest data. It's like a few months behind. I could see why. That water vapor ash, sulfur dioxide from that eruption is now at 35 north. So what we're starting to see is all this aerosol now starting to pervade and move itself north up into the Arctic Circle here. And it won't be too, I bet it's already at 45 or 50 north based on, if those were the July readings where it was at 35 north, cloud cells keep churning it further north. So this might be a reason that we're seeing record snowfall across the Northern Hemisphere. I did a video of this yesterday. It broke through the 57-year average. So the amount of snowfall that we're seeing right now in the Northern Hemisphere has broken through the 57-year mean. So what's going on? There's got to be extra condensation in the atmosphere to create all the snowfall, and you're seeing it everywhere you look. Oh, and Saudi Arabia, if I might add, 3 years worth of rain in a single storm, 3 years worth of rain. And then in Italy, they had 1 inch of rain per hour also. So what you're starting to see across the baseline where it is flooding and raining, 1 inch per hour is the new normal. Other areas is drying out into the drought conditions. So you talk to a lot of people. So what are some of the explanations that you're hearing with the guests that you've interviewed over the last weeks or months?
I've heard everything from the sun, the solar events, to a binary star, to Planet X, to the volcanoes, to the climate geoengineering, to the testing that was done with the nuclear testing in the atmosphere, to also the ionic radiation test, where they would put mass amounts of energy into very small points in the atmosphere, similar to HARP, but even more intense. They've got much more. HARP, I don't even think is in. I think HARP's actually shut down. I don't know if it's active anymore. So there's so many theories about that. But what's really interesting, David, is I used to be so skeptical about Planet X, and no, I have not seen a photo of Planet X. So all the photos out there that I have seen are lens flares, or like Mercury. I saw some photos that were definitely a planet in front of the sun, but it was Mercury. It's just right. It was right. Like, dude, it's Planet X. It's smaller than this. Look at us. Anyway, so but is there some type of planetary body out there behind Mars that is pulling the Earth and causing these changes? I'm much more open to the idea now. It could be way further out, and I would think that it is way further out, because if it was behind Mars, I would think that there'd be an amateur astronomer that could pick it up, unless it was like a dark star per se, and
Brown dwarf.
Yeah, brown dwarf. You had to have specific optics to pick it up, but it's most likely behind the Kuiper Belt. I mean, because if it was to get even close to the Kuiper Belt, wouldn't the Kuiper Belt freak out and start launching a bunch of asteroids towards us? But it does seem like there's some type of cause and effect. It could just be the sun. Maybe it's just the sun. I don't know. Maybe they sprayed so much stuff in the atmosphere attempting to change the climate and cool it off or heat it up or whatever they were trying to do. And all the testing they did with the atmosphere combined with the volcanoes, maybe that's caused the situation that we're in now. I don't think it's just the sun. And I don't think it's just climate engineering either. I think there's a combination of factors here. The binary star theory is interesting because, well, I still think it'd be too far out there. I don't think that's it. No, I keep saying no in my head. That's not it, because there'd be probably too much more in the solar system that would change. But you know what's interesting, David? Like Uranus being flipped on its side, something caused that to happen. It's a massive, massive planet. It could have been a star at one point, possibly. So whatever caused it to tilt like that is interesting. Whatever created the asteroid belt is interesting. Whatever created the Valles Marineris on Mars is interesting. And some of the mythologies, there could be bits and pieces of truth to it, but I wouldn't take it as scientific fact that even if you were to duplicate the names of the gods to the planets and such, there's probably more to the story that took place. Now I'm going to ask you the question. What do you think is causing all of this change?
Magnetic changes, and it's not just specific to our solar system. It's specific to the regional star system and the spiral arm that we're in. We're starting to see a lot of perturbations and dimming on other stars in our regional system here that they can't explain. I think you'd spoken about this last year. It was about a year and a half ago, or a year ago. Remember, they lost over 1,000 stars in the star field. They just went totally black. Well, that would have been some energy wave through coming, causing novas or causing that 0 point to actually go below what it would be for visible light, and they would have just dimmed off like little pieces of coal. And eventually, when the plasma sheath around the sun was strengthened enough again, it would start to go back into glow mode, quote unquote, and it would have what you consider that burning outer surface of plasma. But something that had come through had knocked out 1,100 stars, and they couldn't figure it out. It just one after the other just went dim, 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 dim. Problem is that wave was coming our direction, although it was light years away, but still, does energy really have to follow? Okay, light itself is one thing, but can magnetism travel and work differently than the visible light spectrum? You're talking about making a photon move through space at a certain speed, was 186,000 miles per second. Well, what about gravity in a torus loop? I mean, that's something completely different than physical matter. Protons, electrons, whatever, those are physical, energetic bodies, if you will. But magnetism is something completely different. Although, my realization of having to have the magnetic field for the electric field to follow along, and they have to both, you can't have one without the other. It's the most fascinating thing, really learning about electric currents here, even running down the wire, et cetera, into your house, creating the magnetic field so the electric current can flow. Without that, you just don't have any electricity. So think about it on a grand scale. So what's causing that perturbation further back that's now changing the current flow, if you will, on our local star system, on our, these string of pearls that, come out in galactic formation. Those are all along a line of, winding, twisting, Birkeland current, field-aligned currents that are causing and allowing that electrical interaction for those substances to bind and then become what they do, planets and stars. So something further out is for sure affecting this. And if you knew the actual true history of humanity and the cycles that we're on, because I believe that 99% of the history that we understand as humanity is false or written by the victors for a narrative, nothing being linear. And I really wish I would have a glimpse into our true human past and how long it has been, how many cataclysms there's been, how many societies there have been. They throw some legendary stuff out. Oh, Atlantis, oh, Lemuria. Okay, well, I really want to know scientifically, the humans that existed for 10,000 years in the last interglacial, say 118,000 years ago, same brain function, same anatomical structure. What did they do? Why can't we find anything? Did our planet roll over? Because, our axis also is tilted off, just like you referenced with Uranus. So with all that in mind, think about the cycles. So if you had better information and you pillaged the planet for 500 years and you knew exactly what the cycles were in the entry into the cycle, the ramp up phase to the point where it could no longer be hidden, and perhaps it's geoengineering. I've also heard it called cosmic radiation management. where the cosmic radiation coming in would have an electric charge with it, with the particles that would then bind to, hey, something in the sky, such as an aerosol, i.e. eruptive materials, sulfur dioxide, water vapor, et cetera, bind in and create more rain droplets that would then have these super floods. Well, Morpheus was the person's pen writer, but he was speaking much about this cosmic radiation management. So when you start to look at it, and then you read the white papers by David Keith and their merry bunch of atmospheric marauders and pirates, and then it was over at Cambridge, and then it was at Yale. One of the things that they threw out as a wild card that could end humanity was when their programs were ongoing, if they were to have an eruptive event, just like we had with Tonga or Tambora, that it would take approximately 3 years for the particulates that are being injected to fall out of the sky. But if there was to be an overlayering of particulates with the man-made program and with a natural eruption at that velocity of a VEI-7, which we experienced, then it would have a runaway cooling effect to the point where humanity would be in some jeopardy of massive die-off from lack of food production. And that was one of the things they were very, very afraid of. But because it hadn't had an eruption in that kind of magnitude for 200 years, they thought they were pretty safe. But coming into this grand solar minimum, known electromagnetic effects triggering bigger earthquakes and triggering bigger eruptions, I just don't know why they went ahead with the program, knowing that we were entering this very dangerous time electromagnetically as the sun was changing on its 400-year cycle. Yet they chose to go with the program for the last 20 years and put it in play with a very, very high probability in these years between 2020 and 2030 that we would have a VEI-7 plus eruption, possibly VEI-8, and that's the volcanic explosivity index. And, you know, this overlayering of different man-made and now natural forces, I'm really curious, because the deconstruction of our economy and the wealth transfer happening now and the full deindustrialization of our world, including and starting with Europe, is all on this same exact timeline of when the sun was supposed to step down on a forecastable output based on prior cycles and what we had measured with the sun and the different satellites available to us now. You know, John Casey talked ad nauseum about we are going into some severe cooling, and so did Valentina Zarkova and Dr. Abudzhamatov at the Pulkovo Observatory. And Piers Corbin, you know, I spent some time with him in the UK. We sat down for breakfast and he's trying to explain this thing using a milk crate, trying on different layers with like swimming noodles. This is a CO2 here. Do you think that makes sense? All these people were talking about these same runaway effects with overlapping cooling happening right now, but nobody, either they brushed it aside because they had an agenda, or they brushed them aside because they knew the truth coming out would spook the populace too much, where they would quit investing in their IRAs and they wouldn't obey the rule of law, and society would collapse in advance of the collapse that we're seeing now. I don't know. I just haven't seen anything out in the star field. And I know a guy here who lives really close to me. He has a 5-inch and a 10-inch telescope. So he was showing me some images that they had taken a couple of weeks ago of galaxies. And I was just like, whoa, man, I want to come by. And he invited me by. He's like, I got this new 5-incher, man. You got to check this out. So I was like, have you looked up at Neptune, or have you seen, you know, further out? Can you see Neptune and Uranus and stuff? And he goes, dude, that is so difficult to pick up as an amateur astronomer with a 5 or a 10-inch telescope. He's like, you're trying to pick one pixel out of a full field when you're looking at a galaxy and it takes up a quarter of your screen. You know, a quarter of your lens there is taken up by a galaxy. So even amateur astronomers looking out for something, and they have the known coordinates of those planets in their orbits. So what you're talking about, and what others may be, you know, you're looking at an unknown with an unknown coordinate, trying to pick out one single pixel in a full star field. And maybe that the new magazine, you know, the crypto, if you look at the Economist magazine right now, they have a crypto falling cover, and it's a bunch of bolides coming into the desert. Well, if it is what you're talking about and some other orbital body out there, that definitely would send Kuiper Belt material in, and perhaps we're about to pass through that and our planet's going to get rocked by a bunch of meteors and bolides. I'm not sure, but too many things are in play right now that whoever knew the onset of the cycle has waited to pull the trigger on the collapse and the purposeful collapse of the society.
You also just kind of tripped me out because, as I said a minute ago, thinking about if there was an incoming planetary body or star, that it would go through the Kuiper Belt, and cause all these massive meteorites and asteroids and impacts, bolides, etc. Then I just got back from a People Dome and saw the incredible phenomena out there that people still are debating whether it was an asteroid, a comet, meteor impact, plasma impact, salt dome, swamp gas. There's still a lot of debate. But you said something that's interesting when you brought up the cover of The Economist magazine and there being all of that, all the space debris coming in. What if, dude? That's very interesting, because if it was to come through at that point, there would be, it would be utter chaos, the amount of debris that would be brought in. And that makes me think about something else. If there's an asteroid belt, wouldn't this planetary body, if it does have a return of every 24,000 years or 3,600 years or 12,400 years or whatever the date is on it, wouldn't it have to go through the asteroid belt every time?
Unless it was above or below it. And see, that's a lot of things they were talking about, the telescope in Antarctica or the Southern Hemisphere, that they were looking below the ecliptic for this thing to pass through. It wouldn't actually have to go right through and smash through like a pinball on a billiards table. Gravitationally below or above, it doesn't matter. It's still going to move things out of its orbit for sure. Because you got to think about it. If it did that and it passed 400 years later, whoever wrote the history would definitely leave that passing out. It would, and then everything would restabilize and everything would be back in its orbit. So you and I looking at our telescopes trying to mathematically do it like they did in the 1800s, things would have orbitally stabilized again.
Somebody in the chat said 10-inch telescope, huh? He's bragging. Unbelievable.
20-inch, dude.
Hello. It's really interesting to think about the possibilities. So let's take away the Nibiru Planet X theory, the binary star theory, because if it does get that close, I think if it gets anywhere close to that close, I think if it even gets in proximity to Pluto, that it's going to be way beyond what we're seeing right now. So far beyond what we're seeing right now. The volcanoes, the climate conditioning, we'll call it climate conditioning. I like that. Climate conditioning combined with the solar output. Those three effects right there, could those be enough to create another Younger Dryas event? What if we're getting ready to go into another Younger Dryas type event? Are there similarities if you look at the charts and the ice core samples and stuff?
Well, you would need an impact. You would need an impactor or several impactors to hit that to make it, either ice sheet or straight up rock head up into the atmosphere in forms of like micro dust. Apparently, it was an impactor that hit the ice sheet over Canada. So imagine what you saw in the Economist magazine, all that rolling in and then banging on the ice sheet and creating these massive amounts of water and ice. And, the Carolina Bays here, not too far from me, they're up to the north and to the east, Carolinas, they never could find the impactors that caused all those craters all in the same direction, all in the same arcing direction. Well, it makes sense. If there was an impactor that hit in the Canadian ice sheet and you were sending, chunks of ice that were anywhere from 100 to 500, 1,000 pounds through the atmosphere that all landed in the same direction, they would hit and then they would just melt and you would never find any impactor. So that was, if you look at the Carolina Bays, that's a real interesting, that kind of backs up some of this other research. And the massive floods out west, especially in the Dakotas and around Oregon, Washington, these massive floodplains where something poured out of there at scales that are so far, you couldn't even comprehend it. You think about the most massive river that you've ever seen in your life in the biggest flood stage ever in a 500-year flood, and then multiply that by 10,000. That would be the level of flooding that came through after that impactor. Cosmically speaking, on a cycle, could we head into massive rapid cooling? Absolutely. But what would be the trigger for that? Volcanic activity absolutely would. And then the addition of the aerosols that we've already put up there. So as we come in electromagnetically, and these are all mapped out. So your trigger point here, anybody watching, I encourage you to go to Solar System Scope or JPL. Both of those are available for free. and I have Universal Sandbox on mine here on my local computer. So anywhere that you can map out orbits, I encourage you to look out into October 23rd of 2024. Now that's the electromagnetic coupling that's going to happen in the outer solar system, and our sun is stepping down. Now, please remember, nothing goes to zero, it transits. So if our Earth is in the center of that and it's getting electromagnetically tighter and more activated and stronger every single day as we come through this, we're going to be right in the middle of that. And there's something called a Bloch or Bloch-Schwal, German scientist. Two looping toroid magnetic fields have a zero canceling waving in the exact center between these two looping fields on themselves, kind of like Bose headsets. Now, if the Earth were to pass through that, we would have zero magnetic field for however long that were to be, seconds, milliseconds. Our Earth and the crust would absolutely go out of its, nothing would be locked anymore. The inner core and the outer crust would no longer be, because the only reason that they're locked right now is because it's positive, negative, and they lock each other like two magnets smashed together. But if there's no magnetic field, our Earth's crust is definitely going to slip around, which would make sense on how we're ticked off over there on the side. We're not perfectly straight like most planets are. The equator should be exactly moving around directly where the sun's equator is, but we're tilted off, just like Uranus is. But here's the thing, after we come out of this magnetic coupling, that's phase one, let's say. But as we come out and swing around after October, it's going to be somewhere around March or April of 2025. When we come swinging around the sun, we're going to be the only thing in front of the sun. Every other planet will be behind us. And not only that, gravitationally, the sun, all the gas giants, everything in the entire solar system is going to be, should be this way. The planet will be here and everything getting pulled in gravitationally to the sun and the full magnetic field. And all those other planets are going to come directly through us first. There will be no protector out there. So if we're talking about cosmic impacts, that's for sure when it's going to happen. March of 2025. Whoever's still alive at that point is going to see and witness the things in biblical reference, and all of the legends are coming true. You're going to watch things get pulled in that there'll be no protection. And I really am looking forward to it at the same time in a macabre way. You know, I know it is the end of our civilization, but you know, to be able to witness such a thing as a human and predict it and actually see it come in, that's like, you know, being able to see a plasma discharge on a planetary scale and be able to live in a canyon like Chaco Canyon and see that display above you and then be able to chisel those petroglyphs in the wall there as a survivor. Like to be able to see that and witness that, that'd be like winning 100 lotteries in a row. But this is really what we're up against. So you can see why governments are reacting now and not 2 years prior. And the digital rationing cards are going to be forthcoming because our ability to grow food, because of all these things with the eruption and cooling temperatures in the southern hemisphere, now you're starting to get a more complete puzzle. Well, humanity is going to be much more controlled this point forward because the ability for us to grow food has just been lost. And the realization of when we cannot grow enough food in the southern hemisphere, once that realized, for the traders at least, prices are going to go ape. There will be no more price discovery. As I was talking to somebody in the markets, they're going to go cash. Whoever has the most cash will buy it because price discovery will mean nothing. It will be who has supply and who will pay the most for it. And this is where we're moving to rapidly, like at the end of December, the realization of they didn't get it in the ground in the southern hemisphere and all the losses we're experiencing here in the northern hemisphere. At that point, they're going to have to start rationing food across the planet. And Rex, I'll ask you, who's going to sit by quietly and just go accept it and go, okay, I'll cut my calorie down to 1,500 to 1,200 calories a day. Yeah, here's my little rationing card. I get 1 pound of butter. Thank you. In America, that's not going to fly. People are going to be super angry.